Run with Chestnut.
All right, welcome back to Run with Chestnut. Today we're joined by Andrew. What's up, Andrew?
Hello.
This is our first ever filmed podcast episode.
Oh God, they're watching us.
Yeah, they're watching us.
No, they're watching us.
They see us, but we don't see them.
Crazy. That's pretty normal though.
Yeah, that's pretty normal. All right, first of all, what do you have to drink, Andrew?
Oh, I got myself a cold brew coffee can right here.
You got cold brew, I got Spindrift, because I'm basic like that. Shall we crack?
Yeah.
Sometimes when people crack cans, they leave the tab pointed upwards. And I don't really understand the purpose, because then when you go to drink, you like, especially if you're blind and you don't think to touch it before you go drink, it like pokes you in the nose. So we're gonna a nice fold back.
Yeah, I always fold it back.
All right, so this episode, I wanted to talk to you, Andrew, because we've known each other for how many years? Like 16 years, 17 years, 15 years, something like that.
Now I feel old. Yeah.
You have this thing, this hobby of yours.
Ah, which one?
One might call it a passion.
Ah.
And it's something that I have never actually experienced. And I've never done it. You've never led me in a game, which I'm still a little offended by, because you've led many people in a game.
Oh boy.
Of course, we're talking, because you can see the title, about Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
You also recently was asked to lead an accessible Dungeons and Dragons game at Comic-Con, right?
Oh man, I'm official now. Yeah, I did.
You're official.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Not everyone gets asked to do something at Comic-Con. I just want to dig in a little bit, have a conversation about, why D&D, what it's like to be a blind dungeon master, as you title yourself, and just kind of stick it in from there.
Yeah.
So first of all, can you explain to someone who has no concept of what Dungeons and Dragons is, what is D&D? Not Dunkin' Donuts.
Yes, as we've established many times. Not Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, not Dunkin' Donuts. Even though every time you say to me, you wake up in the morning like, I'm going to go play a game of D&D. It's like, Dunkin' Donuts? That's a game? Yeah.
Oh, man. Okay. So
what is D&D?
Yeah. So Dungeons and Dragons is considered a tabletop role-playing game, TTRPG. It is one of the oldest.
Whoa. What did you just say?
TTRPG, tabletop
role-playing game. Oh my, you just blew my mind.
Exactly.
All right. TTRPG.
Yeah. So that's the category of games. And it's probably one of the most well-known, if not the oldest, originating in the 70s. And essentially, the goal of every TTRPG is that you play with a bunch of other people sitting around a tabletop, and you pick a role to play with a preset number of rules. And the preset rules are there to give you a guideline of what to do. But then the game master, or dungeon master in this case for D&D, is the one who facilitates the game. And essentially, this game master must describe everything that's happening, establish the scene, and basically act as your portal to the world or the game you're playing. So in Dungeons and Dragons specifically, it's well known for being the basis for Lord of the Rings, other way around. It was inspired by Lord of the Rings. And so...
Which you've never read, by the way, right?
I read the first two
You got to
books.
read Lord.
I still haven't finished the third one.
Love Lord of the Anyway, okay. So Lord of the Rings, that whole like fantasy kind of world, you're saying inspired Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, especially the very first edition. As it turns out, as the years pass by, they have published multiple other editions.
Who's they?
They being Wizards of the Coast. They own Dungeons and Dragons. They have been acquired by, I believe...
BlackRock?
No. whoever owns G.I. Joe and Transformers and Barbie.
Oh, interesting.
I forgot the name.
So there's like a cabal that has bought up Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh yeah, this was.
It has bought up. Was it Wizards of Waverly Place?
Wizards of the Coast.
Wizards of the Coast.
Yes.
What about Wizards of like the Midland?
No, we don't care.
It's
about
just
those
the
wizards.
coast.
Yeah, it's just the coast.
Okay, and Wizards of the Coast is this group that has created Dungeons and Dragons.
There is a whole history behind it, but eventually, they ended up as becoming Wizards of the Coast sometime in the 90s. And
why aren't they inclusive of witches?
Because everyone's a wizard. No one says you're a witch, Harry.
Okay, well, I mean Hermione's a witch.
Maybe.
Okay. Okay.
But in Dungeons and Dragons, the most popular one, or what like really sparked the revolution recently, is popular podcasts, kind of bringing it back into the mainstream consciousness. Critical Role or Dimension 20 are really well-known podcasts. They log hundreds of hours, and they played 5th edition, which was what I was introduced to when I went to my first ever Gamers Guild meeting at my first college. And when I went to play Dungeons and Dragons there, I remember showing up and thinking, Dungeons and Dragons, that's a video game thing, right? I played video games before. I got this. And I show up and I was like, where's the computer? Where's the interface? Where's the gaming system? And it's like, no. You sit down with pencil and paper and some dice, and you have to talk to people. It's like, I have to talk to people. This is not what I was led. What Gamers Guild would be.
Yeah. Well, so tell me about. So this is the first time you played Dungeons and Dragons.
Oh yes.
How old were you?
I was 18 at my first college. Yeah.
Okay, and so you were. So how did you hear about this, and like what made you want to just show up?
Oh man. So I was waiting in the commuter's lounge between classes, and I just heard people talking about D&D. And I know my video games, some of them very niche online text-based games, referred to Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy and stuff. And I was like, oh, so this is adjacent. So, hey, I want to play D&D. And luckily they were very welcoming. They said, yeah, show up to Gamers Guild. We play on Wednesday nights. Show up to this room at this time. Bring pencil and paper. And I was like, will a laptop do? I was like, yeah, a laptop works. So I showed up.
So why do you need pencil and paper or a laptop?
Pencil and paper just to keep track of your character and any potential notes you want to take. So as established earlier, a TTRPG, you are obeying a certain number of preset rules. And those rules oftentimes help you create a character. There's a whole character creation process. It's one of my favorite parts of the game, actually, but literally...
Is creating the character that you are.
Yeah, exactly.
And this happens before the game starts?
Typically. Usually, yes. Before the game starts, and oftentimes, if you play a long enough game, you will level up that character and go back in and tweak some numbers, basically.
Got it. Okay. And so who like facilitates all this? The dungeon master?
The dungeon master can, and most often when I'm the dungeon master, I will facilitate it.
Who else would?
There are other people who say that character creation is a personal process. You do it on your own. I like to handhold all my players through this process because at the end of the day, what all TTRPGs have in common is that it's a role-playing game. You are telling a story. You're playing a role and you're telling a story with your character and the gameplay.
So what do you think are the most important skills for you as a dungeon master to, I guess, do a good game?
So dungeon masters come in all shapes and varieties and flavors. I say...
What flavor are you?
My flavor is extreme chaos. I love random things. I love going with the flow. I have a little bit of a background in improv from high school. And so those skills...
No, I'm playing.
I almost caught it. Literally, the improv is especially helpful for me as a chaotic dungeon master because if somebody says something completely random or something I didn't account for, sometimes people will stop the game and be like, no. Your character doesn't know about this. You're supposed to act confused. I'll be like, no, actually, yeah, this is an element that nobody else knew about. Now we're introducing it into this game. Like, for example, if I'm setting the scene and I say, oh, you guys arrive at this town, there's a tavern, there's a market square, there's people roaming about. And then one of my players would be like, hey, you, why are you begging there? I didn't think beggars were allowed in the street. I was like, well, the beggar turns to you and says, well, my street, my rules now. I decided that this is my home. So literally just building off of each other to create the story.
How many people is typically in a D&D game?
Oh boy. So D&D 5th edition especially is predicated on a premise. I'm using big words. Is assuming that you have like four players usually. In practice, that usually ends up being more like 6 or 7 for me because anyone who's familiar with D&D will realize that there are very few people who actually want to host a game. That's an extreme amount of responsibility.
Host means be the dungeon master.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. Host a game, being the game master. It's a big responsibility. Many people find it to be extremely daunting. It's if you don't like chaos, then you have to prepare something for every possible situation. That seems overwhelming. But for me, it's a game. I'm having fun. If we mess up, we'll go back and edit it later. We'll do retcons. We'll do whatever. Like Marvel has done so many retcons at this point.
Are there a lot of blind people in D&D?
Oh boy,
not like percent. I mean, I'm sure percentage wise, right? There's more sighted people than blind people in D&D. Obviously, just ratio wise, whatever. But of the blind community, because like we know a lot of blind people.
Yeah,
we're in the blind community. We hang out with a lot of blind people. Would you say a larger percentage of the blind community play D&D than a percentage of the sighted community?
Because we know so many blind people, I would say it might feel that way. I mean, D&D, because it's just storytelling and pencil and paper, it's extremely accessible. Granted, in the sighted community, when you play D&D, there's going to be a lot more arts and crafts involved. Like a big reason why D&D became so popular in the last decade or so is people are sharing fan art. Like they create these characters, they play with them for hours and hours, and then they draw the character, and that's like a very easy way to just share it on Instagram or something. It's like, oh, look, this is my character.
Have you ever shown up to like an in-person D&D game with sighted people that didn't know you were blind?
Yeah, but didn't know that I was blind. Man, so...
Or I guess if not, then I guess just sighted people.
Yeah, definitely sighted people. The one in-person game I still kind of sort of keep up with is all sighted. As many people know, with D&D, it's so hard to coordinate. You're essentially asking anywhere like from 5 to 6 people to say, let's set aside 4 hours of our time and all meet up at this location to do this like pastime. And in New York, especially, all of our lives are so busy, like it doesn't lend itself well to that. Yeah. So in person, I play with some sighted people. It's funny because outside of this D&D game, they literally have no idea who I am as a person. I met...
how did you meet? How did you link up with them?
Oh, boy. That's a fun story. It was the height of the pandemic. Some people wanted to go out and party. And so I would show up to some of these parties just to meet people. And I met one person at this party, and both of us, both kind of agreed that we didn't really like the party that much. So we decided to leave early. And she gave me a ride to the train station, and she said, "Hey, you said you like D&D. My husband's a dungeon master. We're always looking for more characters." And I was like, oh, sweet. Like, I'll totally play. Where do you guys live? And so I show up to this stranger's house. There's about like 6 or 7 other people. They all know each other from school or something. Or
they all have chainsaws.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as far as I know, I show up and it's like these rickety stairs. I'm sneaking in through the back door of this guy's like back apartment or something. And we play. It's also extremely weird to me because when I showed up, these people are playing, they have full-time jobs, they are trying to make it work, they're living in New York City, life is not easy. They don't know as much about D&D as I do. I have essentially most of the handbook memorized, and I thought that was the baseline because I played with hardcore D&D nerds back in college. But no, not like they were getting rules wrong left and right, and I had to resist the urge to be like, actually, that's not how that works. Actually,
you read the handbook, you know the rules.
I know the rules so well.
How long is this handbook?
I'm not sure, like at least 200 pages or something.
That's a long handbook. Okay.
And then there's supplementary material, and I like know that pretty well too. So what it comes down to is that I'm extremely nerdy about it. I know all the rules. I can modify stat blocks and different creatures and characters and game elements to suit different games. So apparently that makes me absurdly competent when it comes to being a dungeon master, and something I try to keep under wraps for the most part, because when you are the one person in your group of friends or community who is comfortable hosting the game, everyone comes to you and says, "Hey, you want to host our game?" Like we have a group of like 5 or 6 people, and it's like, guys, just pick someone to do it. I don't need to be in charge of every single game. There
was a time where you were like doing 5 games at once, something like that, right? It was like a year or 2 ago or something.
Oh, during the pandemic, there was so much.
There's a lot of games.
Time. Yeah, at one point I was consistently hosting about 5 games a week, and each game being 4 hours. That easily translated to like 20 hours of D&D every week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you miss that?
On some level, a little bit, but more of me is like, no, that's way too much D&D for any person. I need sunlight, dude. I need to go outside.
That's funny.
Yeah, yeah.
How many games are you part of right now?
Right now, barely one.
Barely one.
Barely one. I mean, there's a game that I host that was put on pause until I'm done training for the marathon. And there is that other in-person game, which on average we meet once every 6 months already. So like it's arguable if that's even a game.
So I'm always curious, right? Because we know a lot of blind people who have professions, massage therapists, things like that.
Sure.
And sometimes, not always, but a lot of times they pull from their past, right? Or their childhood growing up. Mm-hmm. Did you ever picture yourself doing anything like D&D when you were going through school?
I won't lie. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons was such an amorphous term before I went to college. I mean, I knew some people would say Dungeons and Dragons, and they're like, "Oh, that's the nerdy thing." I mean, I didn't really care. I mean, I was the type of nerd in high school who was just like, I like the stuff that I like, and if it's not mainstream, then I'm sure it will be soon enough. And that was basically anime.
Yeah,
yeah.
So you're still big into anime. You were
a little bit.
You were for sure big, when you're growing up.
Yeah, I'd say less so now, and I definitely met more people who know a lot more about the current landscape than I do. So,
but like back in the day, I remember we used to bond all the time about anime, Naruto, and things like that.
So good, good.
Did that help cue up your current D&D situation, your skill, I don't know, the storytelling, the arcs, like things like that?
Definitely. I think your experience definitely contributes a lot to the type of DM you will be. And people have sat in on my games, they've listened to my games, they participated. They all say like, Andrew has such a chaotic energy, but he somehow manages to bring it all underneath this huge umbrella of like the storyline, where there are multiple moving elements. And I attribute a lot of that to being a huge fan of Naruto and Dragon Ball and Bleach growing up, all very popular animes. Yeah.
What's something that people don't know about about D&D?
What a lot of people I don't think realize is that D&D is, yes, it's a game, but if you had to summarize it, I would call it storytelling. It's literally just group storytelling.
And being group storytelling, what does that take? Like what makes a good D&D game over a kind of a bland one?
Yeah, an amazing D&D game involves people who you vibe well with. So oftentimes, if people come to me and I like them enough, I'll say, yeah, I'll host a game for you, but you got to pick the people who's going to play with you, because I strongly believe that if you have good chemistry with people outside of the game, you'll have great chemistry in the game. It's essentially just like a group project. They're working together to tell a story, and group dynamics are super important. Very much a communication-based game.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, have you been part of bland D&D games?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What are like the most common reasons why things are like, this is,
The most common reasons is if someone is approaching it like a chore, they bought a book online. You can buy books online that will give you ideas to be a DM. These are like pre-written campaigns, so you don't need to do all the planning. The plan is already there for you. But I'm a strong believer in not using any of those, because those stories have already been told. Even though like people who do in actuality run these campaigns, they probably put their own twist on it. These games become super bland because the person hosting will just be reading it, and like a storybook, he'll be like, okay, cool, you guys have talked it out. Now let me read the next cutscene of this game. It's like, no, if you want a cutscene, like go do a video game, go do any other game. Like D&D, the beauty, the magic is making something unique.
Tell me about Comic-Con.
Comic-Con.
What brought you to Comic-Con? I guess what did you do there?
So Comic-Con was my first time at Comic-Con in New York City. And New York City Comic-Con, for uninitiated, is by far the largest Comic-Con.
Is it the largest?
Now it definitely is. Okay. Attendance this year was 200,000 people.
That's pretty big.
That was nuts. I walked in and I was like, this part is so crowded. Maybe if I go outside, and I stepped to the outside area and there's so many more people out there. I'm like, this just got so much worse. So Comic-Con, for those who don't know, it's a convention for what? Anime and originally
fantasy
comic
games
books
and all that. Hence comic. con.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But like now it's like all things kind of fantasy and like animation. And
Yeah,
things like that.
fantasy, animation, nerdy, artsy, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the biggest part of Comic Con that, when I attended as a patron was just the Artist Alley. So I had
Artist Alley.
Yeah, Artist Alley.
Okay.
So there's a whole floor that was devoted to artists and, showing off their art. And, lots of them were just selling their art there. So my friend and I invited my high school friend to go with me.
Mm-hmm.
And she walked me through the Artist Alley. We looked at all this different art. It was insane how many people were there. Lots of VTubers.
Also, what?
VTubers.
What's VTuber?
VTuber, as I understand it, are people who stream live every day to a dedicated audience, and that's how they make their living. It could be about art. It could be about video games.
But what's the V versus YouTuber? Virtual tuber?
I assume it was video or video game. But
vlogger?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. All right.
Yeah, like there's so many nerdy things now that I have no idea what it is. But
What did you do there?
I had tickets to go for a day as a patron, but the 2 other days I was there as a volunteer for ASL Interpreting Group.
Mhm.
And this ASL Interpreting Group, they essentially put out a post on Reddit that said, hey, we're trying to create an inclusive gaming space at Comic-Con, and we understand D&D is pretty inclusive, pretty adaptable. Are there any blind dungeon masters out there who would come host a game for us? Because we already have plenty of people who are deaf, and we just want to create, inclusive space for people with disabilities. And I was alerted by my friend who browses Reddit, our friend Lily, and she told me, hey, like, this sounds like you, because I know you dungeon master a lot for D&D. And I was like, okay, yeah, I mean, I'll shoot an email. And they responded right away within like 15 minutes. And I had written a whole little paragraph. I said like, oh, I've had over 20 hours of experience per week during the pandemic.
Per week. That's a lot, man.
That was a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
And so they responded and they said, hey, what do you need from us to host this game? And do you like have boards or figurines that you bring to the game, which is something that, a lot of people do. And I responded like, no, I mean, I usually host my games virtually. It's theater of the mind, which is a fancy way of saying just use your imagination. And etc. Like what accommodations I would like to see are snacks and water.
Snacks and water are the accommodations? That's hilarious.
Exactly, yeah.
Wait, what kind of snacks do they have?
They brought some protein bars, most of which I couldn't eat because I have a nut allergy.
You didn't tell them you have a nut allergy?
No, because it's for the players. It's not for me.
Okay, all right. Very selfless.
They also brought water bottles.
Okay.
They brought, I think, goldfish. Goldfish was pretty cool.
The snack that smiles back?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So much. They asked me, like, can you provide a summary for the game so that we can have something for our advertising material? And I sent them brief summaries of the games that I was planning to host. And I love having a little twist. So back in high school for our creative writing class, I remember the short story format is you spend a lot of time setting things up. You tell the circumstances surrounding this character. And then at the very end, with your resolution, you need to include a dramatic twist. And that's the format I used for these very short form D&D games, in my opinion, very short form.
Oh, okay. What was short? How many hours?
Short for me is somewhere around 2 to 3 hours.
Okay.
And just a one-off, like a one single session thing, because, at Comic-Con, I'm not going to see these strangers again. We're trying to create a self-contained story for these people to enjoy. So
how was navigating Comic-Con?
Navigating Comic-Con would not have worked if I did not have the support of my sighted peers or the people I was volunteering with. They sent someone out to get me and I had to come back in. Though I found out much later that actually they had to do that because if you're a vendor, you can designate people as sidekicks. So your volunteers, your extra staff, they are considered sidekicks, but sidekicks can only come in when accompanied by a member with, a full vendor pass.
Oh, okay. And you were a sidekick.
Yes, I was sidekick. And vendors with their vendor passes are usually tethered to their table for the majority of their stay there. So yeah, it's very limiting, but I'm glad I got the experience because it lent some format to the chaos. Just Javits Center, where Comic-Con was hosted, is just huge.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get lost as a sighted person, let alone as someone with navigational issues.
There's not a lot of straight lines.
Not at all.
Right? Which I mean, they have, you know, the auto show, the car show, the boat show.
Mhm.
There's a few other like conventions and things. The
Marathon
New York City
Expo.
Marathon Expo is
Yeah.
there. And for all of those, like, it's just islands of things placed haphazardly just in this a big open area, right? And it's like, I mean, it's so hard to navigate straight lines
Mm-hmm.
when there's non-straight lines,
Oh yeah,
or just like bouncing off of it, you know.
exactly.
I think an example of a convention that is very easy to navigate, right, is like certain like blind conventions
Mm-hmm.
where it's basically just a grid, right?
Exactly.
Like when we were in Orlando
Mm-hmm.
earlier this year, and it was basically 3 big rectangles, and you just
Mhm.
kind of walk around each rectangle. Obviously, like completely different scale compared to something like
Yeah.
Comic-Con or whatever.
It also bears mentioning we had the accessibility fair in New York City that same weekend, and
We did,
one,
yeah.
That one was just a single room, like
Yeah, very different scale, but
Yeah.
like single room oriented so that you can kind of navigate around the perimeter
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, talk to different things. And yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
I guess this I mean, it's a bigger discussion of like not inclusive, but accessible design,
Yeah.
right? And like having that sort of in mind when you're
Definitely.
planning out a floor plan.
Mm-hmm.
Would you go to Comic-Con again?
Oh yeah, I'm planning
Yeah.
to next year. I already have a list of people who I've talked to all about my experience, and they said, "Oh, really? I like Comic Con too. Like, invite me next time." I'm like, "Yeah, I'll reach out to you when I'm buying the tickets 4 months in advance because you need to buy it in
4
May."
months in advance. Wow.
Yeah, and when I bought it in May, by the time I logged in 2 hours after tickets went on sale, there was only 1 day left. I couldn't buy the Thursday or Friday or Saturday passes. I had to buy the Sunday pass.
What do you think D&D gives you? Like, why do you still do it?
Oh man.
What do you get out of it?
D&D ultimately is an expression of art. It's storytelling. It's communicating. It's all the best parts of just hanging out with your friends and trying to problem solve together through your interactive like storytelling.
So you view it as a facilitation of socializing with people.
Yes, and also just basically working on our communication skills and problem solving and being able to analyze the situation you're in
Mhm.
and communicate that to everyone else so you're on the same page. So it really helps, you know, your communication skills in the long run.
Do you prefer in-person games over, I guess, what do you play on, Zoom or Discord?
Discord, yeah.
What do you
Totally
prefer,
Discord.
virtual or in person?
I definitely would prefer in person. I think, as with anything in communications, verbal is a huge aspect of it. But I think there was a study that came out a few years back that said like 70% of our communication is nonverbal. And, you know, you can feel it in the body language, you can feel it in the tone, the expression you hear in my voice sometimes. Like it's, yeah, the in person lends itself so much better.
Yeah. Huh. All right. Well, maybe one of these days you'll actually do a game for me.
Oh man, whenever you have time to set aside for 4
Yeah.
hours and also assemble your team, you need to have good chemistry with the people there, or else it's going to be a
What if
very
we all hate each other?
Yeah. If you all hate each other, that's also dynamic.
What
for
if we
sure.
all hate the dungeon master?
Oh, that's also a definite dynamic. We like they encouraged not to do that in the community nowadays
Yeah.
because you know DMing is already stressful enough. But I mean, hey, bring it on. Let's see what happens.
All right, right on. Well, thanks for being on the first ever filmed episode of Run with Chestnut.
Oh boy,
This was good to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Hilariously, I've known you for 15 years or more, and most of the stuff you said today, I actually had no idea.
Oh, dude,
So-
there's so much.
There's so much. All right, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. See you later.
Bye bye.